All right, today we're diving into a text with a really provocative title, The Cultural and Spiritual Consequences of Braiding Styles. Seriously, it's an argument that connects fashion, history, and faith in a way that I'm pretty sure you've never heard before.
So let's just start with the main question, the big one, at the center of all this. Can a hairstyle actually carry a spiritual curse? I mean, it sounds wild, right? But the source we're exploring today argues that, yeah, it can, specifically braids. So that's what we're going to do in this explainer. We're going to follow the logic of this argument. We'll trace it all the way from its supposed ancient origins through religious history and right up to the claims it makes about life today.
Okay, first up, the ancient origins. According to this source, to really get the spiritual side of all this, you have to go way, way back. We're talking thousands of years ago, to what it claims is the very beginning of the whole practice.
So the first big claim, the one everything else is built on, is this. Braiding started in Africa, and from day one, it was pretty much exclusively a women's hairstyle. Now, you're going to want to keep that gender distinction in mind because it comes back in a big way later on.
And from there, the source kind of charts this journey. It argues the style traveled from Africa, along trade routes, and eventually landed in the Roman Empire. And that's where things get really interesting, because it supposedly took on a whole new social and religious meaning. So significant, in fact, that it even gets a mention in the New Testament.
All right, part two, Roman Empire and religion. This is the pivot point in the argument. This is where, according to the source, this hairstyle stops being just a cultural thing and becomes something with some deep religious weight to it.
So, the text claims that in Rome, braids weren't just about looking good. For the women of the high nobility, it was a status symbol for sure. But, and this is the key part, it was also tied to how they worship their gods. Gods like Jupiter and Venus.
And this is where the source brings in the Bible. It points to this verse from 1 Peter, where the apostle is telling Christian women to avoid all this outward adorning, and he specifically calls out the plaiting of the hair.
Okay, and this part is absolutely crucial for the argument they're building. Plaiting, that's just another word for braiding, right? But the source says, in that Roman context, the Apostle Peter was essentially calling out the hairstyle as a public symbol of idolatry, basically worshiping what he considered false gods.
And, boom, there's the link. The text argues if braiding symbolized idolatry, and idolatry, according to the Bible, brings a spiritual curse, well, then the hairstyle itself became spiritually cursed.
Okay, now hold on, because the text is about to make a huge leap. Way forward in time. We're leaving the Roman Empire and landing right here, today, to talk about what it calls a total reversal.
Yeah, the author literally says someone from ancient Rome would be flabbergasted to see who's wearing braids now, specifically men, and even more specifically, black men. In the source's view, this is a complete gender switch-up from how it all started.
So you're probably asking, okay, so why did this happen? Well, the source points to one single statistic to explain the whole thing. This one, 44.6%. It cites this as the percentage of black people in the US who grew up in two-parent homes, and it presents this number as the main reason for the change.
And here's exactly how they connect those dots. The logic goes like this. Step 1, you have a high rate of single-mother households. Step 2, that means young black men are mostly influenced by their mother's patterns. And step 3, this leads to what the source calls femininity being passed down, which then shows up as sons adapting what were historically female styles, like braid.
And then they bring in another verse, this time from Deuteronomy, to add another spiritual layer. This idea of gender code switching is framed not just as a cultural shift, but as a spiritual transgression, an abomination that gets piled on top of that original curse of idolatry.
Okay, so, final section. How do they tie all of this together? The ancient curse, the modern gender switch? Well, they use one big, high-profile case study, Allen Iverson.
The text basically says Allen Iverson is the guy, that he's pretty much single-handedly responsible for making braids popular among young black men starting in the 2000s. And that makes him the perfect modern example to test their whole theory on.
So the author then lays out what it calls a trifecta of proof. It tries to link Iverson's signature hairstyle, the braids, to what it labels as negative personal traits. They point to pettiness and financial insecurity as direct consequences of this supposed spiritual curse.
And for that pettiness claim, they pull out this one famous, often talked about quote from a press conference. We're talking about practice. This is presented as Exhibit A.
So that's the final piece of the puzzle for this author.
They're arguing that Allen Iverson's life, his hair, his public attitude, and his financial troubles is the ultimate modern-day manifestation of this ancient spiritual curse. It completes the argument that started thousands of years ago.
So look, whether you agree with any of this or not, the argument we just walked through is a fascinating example of how a line can be drawn from ancient history to modern culture, leading to some really profound conclusions. It leaves us with a final thought. If a source can build such a detailed spiritual case around something as common as a hairstyle, what other everyday choices could be viewed through a similar, really unexpected lens?